I posted a great question on LinkedIn about a week or so ago that said, is having too many cases a problem? And look, y'all are smart. So I want to say 80% or more of the people that voted said yes. Because as much as we complain about not having enough leads or enough great marketing, the opposite is still a problem. And that's why it's super important for us to have people like Marko Evans on who help us with recruiting when it comes time to add the right staff members so that we can handle more cases, handle them better, etc. So today we are talking about the 7 things you are doing wrong when it comes to recruiting. That's what Marko is going to go over with us. For those of you that don't know him, he's a Florida native, kind of the reverse Jordan Ostroff. He moved to South Florida from Orlando after attending UCF. I moved up to Orlando from South Florida to attend UCF and haven't left. In 2002, he founded Now Hiring You, an executive search firm specializing in legal and financial recruiting. His firm's shown consistent growth inside of these practice areas and continues to expand. His company, Now Hiring You, has been recognized as the best small business by the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, top 25 executive recruiting firms in 2020 by the South Florida Business Journal, and the top best legal recruiting firm by the Daily Business Review, as well as many other accolades over the years. He knows that part of the formula to success is a strong commitment to that community presence and social marketing. He's been involved with, is it 211 Broward? 211 Broward?
Broward 211, yes.
Broward 211 as an ambassador. Sponsor Andy's Pasta Dinner, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation as a former board member. Previous Mount Sinai founder, Nat King Cole Foundation. Cystic Fibrosis board member, the Broward Humane Society, the Museum of Contemporary Art, and other charities. Marko is the BNI chapter president for one of the only titanium chapters in Florida. What is a titanium BNI chapter?
You have to have a certain number of members. In our case, it's over 50, and it's hard. It's a harder chapter to build to that size, but yes, over 50.
Wow.
I think we've got 72 members now.
Whew. Man, those 60 seconds, that's a whole meeting right there. Marko currently lives in downtown Fort Lauderdale with his dog, Romeo. His wife and daughter live in Paris, France, so he commutes back and forth regularly. Like I said, today we are talking about the 7 things you are doing wrong when it comes to recruiting. Before we dive into that, I want to talk about our last episode briefly. That last episode aired with Melanie Littman, entitled Clothes Maketh the Brand, How to Dress for Success. So if you really want to hear about that it's okay to not wear just a dark suit with a white shirt or a blue shirt, that you can dress, you can have the beautiful pink shirt that Marko has on with the awesome pocket square. You can wear a pink Tyrannosaurus Rex t-shirt like me, etc. Then you got to listen to this wonderful chat that we had with Melanie Littman last week. But enough about that, Marko. We're diving deep into our 7 things that you're doing wrong when it comes to recruiting. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you. And I know those of you all watching this, you can't check out our chit chats before they start. Greg was echoing, I think, all of our sentiments about how this is the most common problem that we see across all of our clients, is finding great people to bring onto their team to handle the extra casework, to overcome the great resignation, to conquer COVID, whatever you want to call it. So I know this will be of amazing help to so many of our listener and watchers. All right, so we've got our 7 things you're doing wrong. I love the first one. I am so excited to talk about what we're doing wrong when it comes to culture.
Well, where do I begin? I mean, culture sets the tone. Culture eclipses technology. Culture eclipses everything, because when you've got people that are rowing, and we've all seen the meme on social media and Instagram, it has all the people that are rowing together, and then it has the one guy that's out of sync. I mean, it can just destroy what you're trying to do internally. And remember, culture before was a physical thing. I'm right next to Jordan. Jordan and I would meet at the water cooler, and we'd have lunch together. One of the questions that we like to ask our candidates after they've been there 6 months, and sometimes even the case of a year, is, do you have a best friend in the office? And when you've got a best friend in the office, it tells you that your culture is working. at least one of the KPIs that you can use to kind of test that. So, you have to figure out how culture is going to work for the model that you have, whether that's a hybrid model, half in, half out, meaning, 2 days on and 3 days remote, or fully remote, or fully physical in the office. The culture is defined by your office policies. So, I mean, that's the foundation of how you have to grow it.
So when it comes to this culture being wrong, when it comes to recruiting, is it companies? I mean, look, everybody has a culture. So I guess, is it the company not being intentional about it? Is it not having a culture for growth, or a culture that attracts the right candidate? Like, what is the problem?
Well, I mean, I think it's the shift. I think it's the paradigm shift between an old mentality and what is a more progressive, newer uh, policy. If you were under, 36 months ago, you developed your cachet, if you will, inside of the office by being the first person there and the last person to leave. Well, that's no longer the case. Well, how do you measure it? And you can't measure it any longer on the physical workplace, because people aren't coming into the office as much. So you have to really look at that and figure out what you're going to do to encourage relationships to occur when the majority of the time you're sitting on a Zoom call like we are today. How do you get to know somebody?
See, it's so funny. I love the what you talked about there, being the first one in, the last one to leave. Because I don't want to say joke, because I'm somewhat serious, but I tell a lot of our clients or lawyers I talk to, if you're responding to emails like 2 o'clock in the morning, just do a schedule send for a time during the workday, so your clients don't get in the habit of bothering you at, who knows what hours. But from what you're talking about, maybe from an internal perspective, you want to schedule some emails for like 11 o'clock at night, 3 in the morning, 4 a.m., even if you're writing them during business hours. So they think that you are, clocking the whole day.
Oh, that's funny. When I travel to Europe, sometimes I'll just respond in European time, and people think I'm working at all kinds of crazy offices, but the office hours, that is. But the reality is that I'm just working my standard workday. But I think you're right about that. You have to be responsive, and it's really funny. I call it a super producer. This is an attorney that's got a book of business that's larger than $1.5 million. That's a portable book of business, and I got to tell you, the one common thread that I've been able to determine is the majority of the time, these super producers are super responsive. People love that. That's how they've grown their book of business. So, are you going to put the same requirements on a 2-year associate as that you would for a 15-year attorney that's trying to grow a practice area? I don't know, but it has to be talked about.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting? Because there is that, it's like that balancing test, right? If you want to treat people, you want to accommodate people's situations, but treat them similarly, if that makes sense.
I mean, it does. And I've actually seen offer letters going out recently. One I read today about expectations. Um, when there are litigation matters that have to happen, and you have to have trial preparation, and you have to have an additional workload, we'll call it. The attorneys have to be prepared for that. And if it's a younger attorney, they may not have that expectation without talking about it and without putting it in writing. So, there's no such thing as too little communication. Another scenario recently, I had a partner that comes in every morning. This is a big firm in downtown Fort Lauderdale. She comes in every morning at 6:30. She's the first person there, and she told the new 2-year associate that um, he's been coming in and working 10 to 6, 10 to 7. She said, "Hey, I'd like to have you here earlier." And the response by the associate was, "I wish I would have known that, because at the hours that it's going to take to come into the office and fight traffic, it's going to be challenging." So, you know, people need to be talking. People need to be communicating about their expectations, whether it's remote, whether they're coming in, or just what the expectation is of when they should be there and how they're going to get mentored, how they're going to be spun up as a younger attorney that's going to make it into a senior associate and ultimately a partner.
Yeah, right. It's not the age-old work-life balance. You 12 hours in the office, 12 hours out of the office, even if you're sleeping for 7 or 8 of those. So I think that kind of dovetails into the next one, technology. So from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, we're talking about what the are. Can you work from home? Are you remote? Is that the technology we're looking for?
Well, it's more than that. There were a lot of firms that had to spend a lot of money on technology when they pivoted in the middle of the pandemic. They weren't prepared for, having 1,000, 2,000 people working remotely. And that comes at a price of, in the case of one firm I'm thinking of right now, millions of dollars that they had to spend on laptops and monitors and routers and printers and mouses and everything it required to allow their employees to go remote. People weren't coming in; they were afraid to. Firms wouldn't allow it. So if you haven't put together technology that allows your people to work remotely, chances are they're not working as efficiently as they could. Now, I've read studies that say that people are much more efficient when they work remotely, and they're much more efficient when they work at the office. But it doesn't always factor in the drive to get there and, the number of hours that they would spend. I'd much rather have somebody that's remote for 12 hours, meaning they can respond and get in front of their computer, rather than somebody that gives you 100% for 6 hours if you include a lunch and a break and, times to the, you know, to leave the office.
But that probably kind of goes back to the culture aspect somewhat of the, do I expect you to be available even if you're not working for, and for what hours?
You're right about that. You're completely right about that. And availability is key. You have to be careful of that in non-exempt employees because, and talk to your labor and employment lawyers about that. But a non-exempt employee, meaning they're not exempt from overtime. If you're texting them and you're communicating with them and you're scheduling Zooms at 7 o'clock at night, then you're going to need to be paying them by the hour. So that's another thing to consider
Which you're
as a paraprofessional, paralegal, legal secretary.
Which reminds me of a funny joke. I was talking to a friend who's a criminal defense attorney, and I won't single him out because of what he said, which is too funny. He goes, "Yeah, my local prosecutor's office, they stopped allowing people in the office, and for a couple of them, it did not change their ability to respond to my emails in any way, shape, or form." I was like, "That's funny."
That's funny.
So, anything else about technology?
You want people to be efficient. That's the bottom line. So if you've got two monitors at their office, why give them a little tablet to take home? Go ahead and bite the bullet. Get them set up with a really efficient home office that duplicates what they have at the office. And in some cases, you have to also review their bandwidth for internet, because if you're having them download big files, he or she download big files, and they need to print them out and they need to review them, that means a full duplication of what they have in the office so they can be completely efficient at home.
I know that one all too well. So for those of you that know or don't know, so my wife, kid, and I do a cross country drive for 75% of our work weeks. So I happen to be in Orlando this time. But man, the amount of you're staying at a nice hotel and the internet is terrible. And I'm like, what do you want? Like, it's 2022. Everybody's working from the road. Like, you got to have good internet. So, all right.
True.
Compensation. So what are we doing wrong when it comes to recruiting compensation wise?
Well, at the end of the day, attorneys are really only paid one of two ways. They're paid for what they produce and they're paid for what they originate. Nothing else matters. What they produce and what they originate. However, when you're looking at compensation for associates, there's a lot of factors that come into play. Associates aren't paid that way. They're paid a base and a bonus. So the reality is that how are you going to encourage inclusion? How are you going to encourage how you're compensating somebody when old school mentality says that you want them to be paid for the amount of time that they're in the office, what time they get there? It's the face time that counts. That was the old way. So how does it work now? You've got to really take a close look at that and look at other factors. It's math plus parency. You have to consider what you're going to do to encourage that person to be productive. And guess what? There are firms that have already figured it out. Ramon, as an example, Fisher Broyles, these are 100% remote law firms that they were founded that way. They've developed technology that way, and they've developed communication that supports collaboration, not FaceTime.
And so then tying that into how they're compensating people becomes easier, or they just do it, or they just do it correctly because it's part of their culture.
Well, I think it needs to be said that most of the 100% remote law firms are partner based. They're not based with the typical hierarchy of managing partner, senior associate, associate, and law clerk. They don't work that way. It's if you're a partner and you want to work remotely and you want to maximize your book and you don't want to pay for um, office space or type A, class A offices in downtown whenever, then these are firms that work really well in that environment. But that's not necessarily reality. They are the minority that work and function that way. 95, 98% of every other law firm, has a presence. They have a brick and mortar. They have, a hierarchy.
Makes total sense.
It's a partner on the top, whereas I think the remote law firms are an inverse pyramid. You've got only partners on the top and very few associates funneling down. So, your compensation needs to be structured around how your firm is designed, not what policy dictates. So there's a lot of factors that have to weigh in on it.
From a high level view, the 10,000 foot perspective, do you have a couple 2 or 3 insight wisdom tips on compensation packages for associates in this market?
We do, and the first one is to pay them more because that's what the firms are doing. It's the market is very, very, very tough. We have one firm in particular that pays for a Peloton membership. It allows for both paternity and maternity leave. So both the husband and wife working employees of the firm can ramp down before the baby is born and ramp up after. It's about inclusion and making people feel good about working there. I hear partners complaining because they're paying for the medical insurance of the associates. People need medical. All you have to do is go back and look at all the case studies that happened in the middle of in the pandemic, and people needed to have care. So healthcare is more important than ever. You have to keep an eye on that. Salaries are going up, and the firms that are really focused on what they need to do better to attract the associate are winning.
Gotcha. I mean, so it's like, have you've been doing this for a while, even though you were still very young. We'll balance both those things. Um, have you seen a time that was comparable to this? Like, it seems like we just suddenly inverse the power to the employee as opposed to the employer having the power for so long.
I think some of the larger firms, call them your AM20 firms, that are very, very particular about who they hire. Uh, I think they're going to be the slowest to move. $100 an hour, um, attorney, you have to make sure that the supporting staff is equally as good. But no, I've never seen anything like it before. It's a pandemic of all its own.
Gotcha. Okay. So then the next one you have listed is keep it social. So when it comes to what mistakes are we making, are we not keeping it social enough? Are we keeping it too social? What's the problem?
Um, I've had partners that have scheduled dedicated one-to-one times with associates so they can learn. There are groups that can be created that keeps your employees together. We can't just gather in the lunchroom anymore. We can't just decide to walk down the street to a cafe. Not if I'm 45 minutes away or an hour away or I'm working remotely. It doesn't work. So there are things that you have to do to solidify your team, your workflow. Um, there was one firm in particular that I'm thinking about that created it was a woman's aerobics separate ecosystem, if you will, almost like a social gathering. So people inside of the firm that had similar issues could feel included and connected to their other fellow attorneys. It's just one of the things that we have to do to keep people connected.
So are there, I mean, I guess similar question in this one. Are there any, 2 or 3 things you've seen firms do to maintain that camaraderie that you think have been really effective?
I've seen virtual happy hours that have been done pretty funny. Where you bring your favorite liquor and you sit in front of a camera and you invite the people from the office to enjoy themselves. I mean, that seems to work. But then again, if not everybody's a drinker, you've got an issue there. Um, Breakfast meetings are certainly a good one to kick off a day, and looking at what people's what their I guess what their habits are and some of the things that they do socially outside of work, whether it's playing a game like playing chess together online. It helps people to stay connected.
Yeah, we had along those lines, we had a judge. So I think it was through our CFAL, Central Florida Association of Women Lawyers. And so one of the judges did like a cooking class. And so they had the thing, 2-3 weeks out. They gave everybody the ingredients they needed to have at the house ready to go. And then they all went on Zoom and cooked brownies, and maybe there were a couple of them together. And I thought that was an interesting one, because then you're not really worried about the alcoholism in the legal industry, while still having people be able to share that moment with something.
I love it. I love it. Whether it's yoga or a boot camp or even meditation that can help a lot of people. I mean, it really works. You have to make sure that people are still feeling connected despite the fact that they're working remotely.
Totally. All right. So then we're talking about safety protocol. We talking about safety protocol from COVID?
People have to feel good about coming into an office if they do decide to come in, and know that you're taking precautions to protect their health and their well-being. A lot of people have exposed family members that, frankly, they're really concerned about, whether it's a young child or an older parent, and it's you have to make sure people feel good about that, and that the firm and the office has taken the time to make sure that the office is sterilized, and that they're going to feel good about coming into a clean environment. It's critical. The mindset have changed. I mean, all you have to do is whether you're on a bus or a train, doesn't happen too often down here in South Florida, but look at the amount of times that people are putting the hand sanitizer on their hands. People are concerned.
Yeah, totally. And I guess, do you find that working, not backwards, but like, so, we're in Central Florida, you're in South Florida. Do you find that making people more aware of like what's the hurricane protocol, or you think it's really just a very COVID focused?
Well, I mean, I think it's everything. You have to appeal to what somebody's concern is. As leaders of a business, you are going to hear some very interesting reasons why people are concerned. Whether it's the drive, whether it's the price of gas, whether it's coming in, whether it's parking, worried about their health and well-being, you're going to hear from them. Because the one thing I think that is the overreaching consistent thing that I hear so much is people have become more vocal. They're standing up for what they believe. And I think that's also part of the reason that you're seeing this great recession. Great resignation. Thank you. And that people are deciding they don't want to be exposed, whatever that's defined as. But people want to make sure that their voice is heard, and that the company is doing what they can to try to accommodate their concerns. Very critical.
Very true. Is there any, I mean, I assume this is kind of one of those, there are some candidates that won't necessarily care about the safety protocol, but for the rest, it's just kind of more is better? Or is there like a very specific safety protocol that fits the culture, that fits technology, that makes the most sense?
That's a great question. And I think that every firm and every employer has an obligation to have a baseline of health concerns. You talk about your office getting sterilized. You turn off the water cooler. You turn off the coffee machine, for fear that something could spread. And of course, you have to follow